Hi, it's Darren from SimNation again. Wanted to do a video for bowl-bound college football, which is a Grey Dog software title, specifically around the WWCF. This is the premier bowl-bound college football league for SimNation. It's been around forever. It was actually the league I started in. I started GDCFL and then went to WWCF, but I've been in both leagues for a while and I've been commissioning both leagues for a while. This year was an interesting year for SimNation when it came to this title. We had two leagues. We had GDCFL and we had WWCF. We combined the two. It was a lot of work. But I think what we're starting to see is a highly competitive product. Some of the coaches in GDCFL only played there, and they were fantastic coaches. I'm thinking of people like Kevin, Cardle, who else is someone that was over there that David, um, people like that. And then you had coaches like Mike Schmigo, uh, Mike Cart, who played in both leagues, but they were dominant there. So the way it worked is when we combined them is if you had a GDCFL team, you got to pick whether you wanted your team to move or not. We did move quite a few teams. Don't recommend ever doing that. That was not fun. Um, but I think that it has produced a interesting season for WWCF with both um, groups of coaches coming together. So I'm going to run through this real quick. I'm logged in as Maryland. Maryland did not come over from GDCFL. I made a choice not to do that. The Maryland team in GDCFL was actually more powerful than the one in WWCF, but I didn't want to do it, so I didn't do it. So you have Maryland up in front of you, but I'm not going to linger on Maryland. I really want to talk about where we are. So we're in week 12. We have a pretty good idea of way things are stacking out. My goal is to do a video a week for WWCF. So the next video will likely be the week before the conference championships. Um, so let's just dive straight in. One of the things that you'll notice, and let's just start with this, is the top team is Mississippi State. This is a GDCFL team, but it's coached by a coach who's coached in both leagues. This is, of course, Mike Cart. Mississippi State was a powerhouse in the GDCFL. Coming in at number two is Texas Tech. This is Mill. He's just a phenomenal coach, like Mike. And this is a WWCF powerhouse. Texas Tech has won the title numerous times, and Miller is always in competition with both Texas Tech and his other teams. Arizona is a import from GDCFL. This is Kevin. Kevin is probably one of the most phenomenal coaches I've ever seen. He's built Arizona into a powerhouse, and he's got them right there and competing again. Rutgers is another Miller team. You see a trend here. Miller has a lot of good teams. And Rutgers is kind of the team that competes with Maryland on the East Coast. Louisville is an import from GDCFL. This is another coach who played in both leagues. This is Rob. Uh, and he's doing a phenomenal job with Louisville this year. He's got them at 10-0. And they're leading the Coastal, which is no small feat given when I show you the standings, all the human coaches that are in the Coastal of the ACC. Michigan is open. If you want to come into the league and you want a great team, Michigan definitely is a great team to take on. They were long coached by John LeBlanc, who's a legend in the league, who retired. So definitely still got them on a good trajectory. I pretty much think they've won the Big Ten division that they're in, which is the East. Texas, this is another team that is coached by Mike. This is Mike Schmigo. There's a couple Mikes in the league. But Texas did come over from GDCFL where they were powerhouse. They'd won multiple championships. And I'm happy that he's got that team going. Mike has been a long-time coach in both leagues, so it's no shock there at all. That he's got them on a good path. Stanford is actually a team that was imported from GDCFL. This is Rich Troxel. He was a longtime GDCFL coach. This wasn't his original team, but he gave up his original team because, which was USC, because there was already a coach at USC. So I agreed to move Stanford over, and he's doing a great job with them. Of course, I have Maryland, which I have almost in every single league. Um, I'm trying to remember. I don't think Cincinnati's actually coached. Cincinnati, yeah, actually it is. It's Sparkon. So Sparkon is a phenomenal coach. He gave up his team. I think he gave up Georgia Tech, if I remember correctly. And he's doing a really good job there as well. TCU, this is Rob again. He has another team. As you can see by the record, it is a very competitive league right now. You have very few undefeated teams. I think Mississippi State, Texas Tech, Louisville, and Michigan are really the only undefeateds left. In most of these conferences, because we have quite a few human coaches in them now, no one can just run away with the conference like they used to. Florida, this is Harry. Harry's a long time coach in both leagues as well, but he's done a phenomenal job at WWCF for a long time. Utah's open. Alabama, this is Tim. Uh, Tim has done just a great job with Alabama since he took him over. I think that he's one of the SEC mainstays and powerhouses. Notre Dame is Kevin again. This was a little bit of a step up for him because in GDCFL, and this is a GDCFL team, by the way, uh, they weren't in the Big Ten. They were actually, I think, in Conference USA. So he's restored the luster of the Golden Dome, and he definitely has them on the right path. And we'll look at the standings, and you'll definitely see that. Marshall was coached until recently by Mike Dills, who was the commissioner before me and just a phenomenal coach in person. Kind of hope he comes back at some point because he was always fun to play against. Air Force was another one of John's teams, and he built them into a powerhouse before he left. Illinois is, if I remember correctly, is another Mike Smigo team. Excuse me, sorry. Um, and he has a lot of good teams, and this is one of them. Wake Forest came over from GDCFL. This is Mike Cart. He actually in the GDCFL, Wake Forest had become the dominant powerhouse in the ACC. It wasn't Maryland. And he's really done a phenomenal job there. And of course, the Maryland Wake Forest game is coming up next, which will determine who wins the Atlantic. Arkansas, this is Cardle. He's a longtime coach from GDCFL. He's one of the more phenomenal ones that came over. So definitely the first year in the SEC hasn't been particularly nice to him, but the SEC is one of those conferences when we talk about it, it's just full of coaches, human coaches, and they're all of great quality. So they're just beating each other up at this point. Rice, this is Mike Cardigan at 21. Uh, Again, he's had this team for a while and he's built them into a Big 12 powerhouse. Georgia's David. David did a phenomenal job in restoring Georgia in GDCFL through recruiting, and um, while the record doesn't show it, he's gonna do pretty well with Georgia Hill. He finally gets to have a team that's worthy of his coaching. And then the only other big one here is USC, which I believe is Mike Schmigo as well. And again, the Pac-12 is one of those conferences where they're just beating each other up. So if we kind of look at the standings, the Atlantic is really a two-team race at this point. It's Maryland and Wake Forest. Maryland has to beat Wake Forest, otherwise Wake Forest will win the title. And Wake has to beat Maryland. So that game coming up next will determine who wins the Atlantic. The race in the Coastal's over. Rob won it with Louisville. Again, there were quite a few coaches that are now in the Coastal. Um, but hats off to Rob. It's not an easy thing to take a team like Louisville, come into a conference like the Coastal part of the Atlantic Coast Conference against people like Harry, Dave Charles, Cardle's in there as well, um, and be able to go undefeated and essentially claim it. And Louisville's having just a monster season, so Rob's done a great job there. When we talk about the Big East traditionally is Rutgers and everybody else. And it's still largely that way. I think largely Mills got the North wrapped up. He should be able to win that. Uh, and in the South, it's still a race down there. So I think it's between Rob and I want to say, and I apologize, and Dave Sparkon. So I just want to see something real quick. Also humor me for a second. I just want to see if they're playing each other. And again, I'm logged in as myself, so I can only see so much. But yeah, so essentially, if Cincinnati, who won the heads up play, do, do, do. So Cincinnati wins their next game against Troy. They will clinch the Big East South. Of course, if Texas Christian loses, it doesn't matter. They clinch, but you could run into some weirdness with South Florida. I think the only other coach that is human that is in this league would be, no, that's really it. So it's between Rob and Sparkon for the South. Rutgers has the North pretty much locked up. And that should be an interesting matchup to see who comes out in the conference championship, though. When we look at the Big Ten, I mentioned this earlier. Notre Dame, Kevin's just done a phenomenal job with DWK is at Penn State. He's a coach that played in the GDCFL a long time ago and came back. Penn State had some opportunity, but he's doing a pretty good job with them this year. The record doesn't reflect that, of course. It almost never does. Ohio State is Rob. They're having a little bit of a down year. Michigan State is Marcus. This is his first year with Michigan State, so I wouldn't read into that. But it's really Kevin versus Michigan. I think going to be the conference championship there, and I like Kevin in that matchup. I think both teams will actually make the playoffs, but Kevin's just doing a phenomenal job there. The Big 12, this one's interesting. Mostly because we had at least one GDCFL team that came over in the Big 12. Really two, but Texas was already a powerhouse. I'm sorry, three, because I keep forgetting about Oklahoma State. So we had three teams come over. It shifted some of the power in the North. Um, so this race is still pretty wide open. They're just beating on each other down in the North. So Baylor, of course, is beats. Kansas State is Rich Troxel, who I mentioned earlier. Uh, I think Kansas State has a pretty good chance of taking this one. Um, and then North Texas, of course, is a CPU team, but that was a team largely made famous by Danny Z, who's just a blast from the past. Kind of wish he'd come back. Along with John because I those are two guys that I kind of miss having in the mix. Danny was the guy who taught me how to build a passing attack that I still use. If I'm not mistaken, I think that Kansas State won the head-to-head. So if they win their next game, which is against Baylor, which is no small game because Beats is going to really try to win that one, especially since I think he still has an inside chance if North Texas loses to Texas A&M. I think again one of those three teams could easily win the Big 12, but if Rich can win against Baylor, then he's got it. Texas Tech, Miller's got it. He's just having a really good year with Texas Tech, so it's good to see. I think Texas is actually going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot. And this is Mike Schmigo. Uh, they're a really good team. I don't think Rice is going to be able to get into the playoffs. I think it's too deep. And then Oklahoma State is Dave again. And he's done a good job with Oklahoma State in his first year. I really like the competitiveness of this. I did, of course, move Missouri down into the South because I had to do some restructuring in order to make all this stuff work. Um, Conference USA, this one is pretty much. I need to look real quick and see who has the head-to-head. So Northwestern and Ball State are both human coaches. So if I'm not mistaken, that's Mike Cart versus Harry. And Illinois, of course, is Mike Schmigo. There's no shock they'll. Mike has built Illinois into a power with them. In fact, I think I'm going to have to start looking at Illinois a little bit to see if it's time to bring them back into Big Ten. They got dropped because of they got dropped just because they had such a low prestige. I think in the head-to-head, if I remember correctly, Northwestern has the head-to-head. I think they play Miami of Ohio, whereas Ball State plays, I think, Air Force. So in order for Ball State to win, Northwestern has to lose, and they have to beat Air Force. Not quite sure that that's going to happen, so I think Mike's going to take that one. And then of course his gift is he gets to face the other Mike in the conference championship game. So that should be a really interesting one. Both teams have kind of aspirations of getting into the playoffs. Um, so one or two of them may actually have a chance. There's really not much to say about the MAC. I'm probably going to gloss over them. I think I think there are two teams here that are human coached. I think if I remember correctly, Akron is Dave Charles or Blue Roos. So I think he has a chance to get this still. Um, I'm trying to see. Yeah, he's got to win, and Connecticut has to lose. There's a good chance that that could happen. But he's got to beat Northern Illinois, and then Connecticut essentially has to lose to Temple, which is possible. It's two CPU teams against each other. Army is Tim. Army's not having that great of a season, but he'll get them back on the path. And then of course Western Kentucky, Toledo, both CPU teams. So if Blue Roos can pull it out, he will get to face either Western Kentucky or Toledo. There's probably only one team going from the MAC into the playoffs. And the way the playoffs work in this league is the conference champions each get uh, an automatic spot, and then there are six at-large bids. Mountain West, this is an interesting one, mostly because so Merrill is at Idaho. This is Rob, and then Washington State is my second team. Um, so Rob's got the East Championship. He beat both me and Merrill in head-to-head. So really good year for Wyoming. Merrill, I think he needed to win this in order to have a chance of getting into the playoffs. UTEP is CPU. There's not another human team, I think, in the MAC, if I remember correctly, other than the three, which are all in the East. So I may drop off Washington State and like go back to one of these other teams. I've had New Mexico, Hawaii before, but I like Washington State. I'll probably stay though. But whoever wins this conference, whoever's the for a Mountain West team to make it to the playoffs, they're going to have to win the conference title. They don't have the record or the strength of schedule to do otherwise. So Rob's going to have to down likely UTEP in order to get there. Pac-12, this one I mentioned before, is the Pac-12 has quite a few human coaches in it. Stanford is Rich Troxel. He's already locked up the North. Cal is Marcus. He's having a little bit of a down year. Um, I don't think it's because of the competition. I just think it's a down year for Cal. Arizona, of course, is Kevin, and he's pretty much got locked up the South as well. Mathematically, Utah can still get in there, but really, I think that there should be two teams from the Pac-12. I think whoever doesn't win between Stanford and Arizona will likely make the playoffs. SEC, again, this is one of those conferences where they just beat on each other. And there's so many humans in this league, it's not even funny. So I'm trying to remember if they play. Yeah, they only play eight. I think it's the Pac-12 that plays nine. Um, so largely, Harry's got it from Florida. He kind of needs to win out in order to have a chance at an at-large bid. And then, of course, Mike has just been crushing uh, everybody in his path with the Mississippi State. An upcoming game is Alabama versus Rutgers. It's the Scarlet Bowl. That's a yearly battle between Tim and Merrill, which is always one to watch. I expect Carter to get his feet under him pretty quickly next season, and he'll bounce back. That SEC West is just going to be, it's going to be brutal. The SEC East really isn't as much because you have really only uh, Harry and David though. I don't think there's anyone else. Whereas in the South, you have Mike, you have Tim, you have Cardle down there. You used to have Rob at Mississippi, but he had to drop them because of a conflict. And then finally at the Sun Belt, Rob has Montana. He should be able to win that, and then he'll play a CPU. So it'll be interesting to see if I had to guess as to who's going to make it to the playoffs. If you just assume like that the top team in each conference is going to be the representative. The at-large bid is probably going to be someone like Maryland, which is a something that some teams will worry about. I wouldn't worry about Maryland this year. They're having a lot of issues at quarterback. They're not as dominant as they normally are. You'll probably see Texas, which is not a first round matchup any team wants as an at large bid. Stanford is another one of those that you just don't want to see. And then you could have Cincinnati or TCU, which is just yet another one. And then, of course, you got Marshall in the mix. So it's going to be an interesting final few weeks to see who makes the playoffs and who doesn't. From an awards watch, I think the Davy O'Brien normally goes to someone from Maryland. It's not going to happen this year because Dubois got hurt early in the season, and Maryland is changing up quarterbacks every other week. So I think you're going to see the Mississippi State quarterback potentially get it, or you could see Covington from Rutgers, who's right here. He's having a really good year. It's always that thing about what do you value more? Do you value the consistency? Or do you value the touchdowns? We'll see what the CPU does. CPU typically does value touchdowns more than anything else, so that'll be an interesting thing. When we look at running backs, yeah, Diaz is having a great season, but again, the CPU tends to look at touchdowns, so Farrell may get a chance. Trying to see who's the leader. Normally, this is a category where you see Texas Tech or Rutgers in the mix. But Miller's diversified a little bit. It used to be a sure bet that every year the top rusher was going to be from either Texas Tech or Rutgers, and the top passer was going to be from Maryland. Um, so it's changed up a little bit because of the dynamic of GDCFL joining, but I do think that it's probably going to be like Farrell. And by the way, we do vote for Heisman. I'm probably going to bring that back now that I've got the time, and we vote for Coach of the Year. Uh, because I just think those are two positions where there should be some vote. But it'll be interesting to see who the computer picks. If I had to guess, Stites has a pretty good chance from Ohio State, and then Cabrera from Miami, Ohio. Diaz could get in there depending on how the CPU prioritizes it. The Bolitnikov will be an interesting one. My personal opinion is you got to look at Flaherty from Michigan and Shapiro from Rice. But again, this is one of those where touchdowns come into play, and they may look at McClellan. I doubt it though, because generally the CPU does a pretty good job with this one. Kim will probably be in there, but he should have better stats. But his problem is he doesn't have a great quarterback throwing to him. The Mackey, I think Star Wars is going to probably win that one. And rightfully so. He's the best tight end out there right now. Lombardi, this one's always an interesting one to me. My personal opinion is the guy who has the least amount, who has the best key run blocks and pancakes, and the least amount of sacks is the guy who should get it. Um, I wouldn't be shocked if we see Bradley from Middle Tennessee win that. I think Middle Tennessee, if I remember correctly, he may have had to drop them. He did. Was Mike Hart in the Sun Belt? Dave Charles has Tulane, Blue Roos. But I think that you'll see that Bradley has a good chance of winning that based on just how the computer thinks. This one will be interesting. I have no clue who's going to win the Outland. The computer, every time I think I've got it right, tends to miss it. But if it was me, I would be looking at Barnes from Mississippi and Contreras from Texas. The Buckus, of course, goes to the best linebacker. Hamilton has a pretty good shot at it, but in a combined sense, probably Holloman from Pittsburgh would be the guy that probably should be looked at. Thorpe, of course, goes to the best cornerback or safety or defensive back. So Schneider is one of the guys in the mix. I think it's really going to come down between Moore, Gentry, and Woods from Texas, USC, and Stanford because they lead in interceptions, um, which is probably the way it should be. The Groza, I have no clue who's going to win this one. The CPU every year kind of doesn't pick the person I would pick. But I think Washington from Mississippi State should definitely be the guy up there. Some years it prioritizes points over percentage, and you get some weird thing hit there. My personal opinion is net is always more important than average, but the CPU a lot of times will choose average. So if they go that path, Cartwright from Texas Tech would probably be the person that wins it. And then this is another one those will it really comes down to touchdowns, who's got the most. Um, and that's probably where you may see Baker from Rutgers get it because he's a combined person. So that's kind of where we are. If I had to say how the league is going, it's a lot more competitive than it's ever been. The addition of the two leagues, I think, has really helped. I am pretty excited about what I see in the top 10. And I'm excited just about how the playoffs are going to look this year. I don't think that we're going to have a pretty wide open race. And if you think about it, I think in the past, I think who won the league last year? So Mike Hart won with Rice in the WWCF. The year before that, it was Marcus with Cal. The year before that, it was Mike Schmiegel with USC. Before that was Rutgers with Merrill. So the last 4 seasons, we've had 4 different coaches win it. Whereas on the GDCFL side, uh, the previous season I won it with Maryland, but then Mike had won it 2 seasons with Texas. Kevin won it with Arizona, and then Harry won it. Mike was really kind of becoming the power over there with Texas because he was in the finals a lot. And Kevin was always out there. Just so you know, Kevin had one of those runs with TCU where he was just very, very dominant. No one could get past him. And it almost, I think, became Kevin versus Mike for the GDCFL title. So very, very great wide open race. If you play bowl bound and you're interested in a league, this is probably the league for you. Some of the best coaches are here. We'd love to have you. There are a lot of teams open. I'll put the links in the video and definitely take a look. But thank you for your time tonight. It's going to be a really exciting race to the end of the season and can't wait to see who makes it to the playoffs, which I should be able to kind of preview a little bit more before then, at least tell you who's in the conference title games. So have a great night. Thank you.